Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers were waxed by the defending champs at the Crypt on Tuesday night. It puts the new trade rumors about guys from Orlando and other spots in a different context. Plus, interesting comments from LeBron James and Russell Westbrook after it was all over. We'll get to all of it coming up next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to thank everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on weekends. We get this thing up as early as we can for you, no matter how you get your podcasts, where you get your podcasts, and best of all, it's always free. Make another Locked On podcast your second listen of every day, and it's Super Bowl week, Andy. How about that Locked On Rams podcast with our buddy Travis Rogers? Good.
Indeed.
Also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com and use the promo code NBA, or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. So we'll try to get to some comments that were made after the game by Frank Vogel and LeBron James and Russell Westbrook. It was certainly an interesting post-game media session for the Lakers after they lose 131-116 to the Milwaukee Bucks in a game that, quite frankly, wasn't that close. And some trade rumors percolating. It was a big day for trades Tuesday, I should say, in the NBA, and the Lakers are certainly in the middle of a lot of rumors. So we'll get to that, because that game, Andy, on Tuesday put a lot of it into context, I think, at least for me. I have a theory, and you can tell me if you agree with it, that like the thread of hope that the Lakers have is that, if AD is dominant and LeBron is dominant and, Russ is kind of in some decent form, you have two of the best players in the league, and that maybe can carry you through a couple series. I'm wondering if Tuesday night showed some of the potential limitations of that strategy going forward.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that the Lakers were clearly outclassed by the Bucks, and LeBron said as much after the game when asked about whether or not the Lakers could get to the Bucks level this, right now. He said no. And, there was a bit of aggravation in LeBron's answer, and he clearly felt like he was being set up just to give a quote, the Lake of where they are right now. So I think
there was a lot of frustration after the game.
Right.
Just like, the media is asking the same questions because the Lakers are in the same place. They're not making any progress.
So I think there was a bit of intentionality with bluntness, more to prove a point of like, the hell are you asking me such an obvious question, as opposed to really revealing, how he feels. Although he said, like, look, I could have told you before the game, we're not at this team's level. And that is no mystery. Where I do think, though, Brian, it throws a real, or it's difficult to know how much it throws a wrench in that theory, the working theory of dominant LeBron, dominant AD, is neither one of them was dominant in this game. Like this was not a game where LeBron nor Anthony Davis, who've both been fantastic of late, really they didn't feel like they were having as much of an impact as Bobby Portis, much less Giannis, who was an absolute freaking monster. 44 points, 17 of 20 from the field, 14 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 blocks, and Brian, 0 turnovers.
Yep. It is an impressive game when you shoot better from the floor than you do from the free throw line. He was 17 of 20. That is insane. But I mean, you mentioned guys like Bobby Portis. Look, LeBron's stat line in the end looked fine. 27 points, 5 rebounds, 8 assists. But it was, particularly early, where the Lakers were dominated. And that's kind of my point. This is one of the things I was getting at, is like, if either one of those guys isn't dominant, they're not going to win. And like as sort of like my working theory of how they can make it, a little further than people expect. If you don't get a decent game from Russell Westbrook, like you're going to be in trouble. And Russ was really bad in the first half. He was getting booed by the home fans in the first quarter, which is something that perhaps we can talk about as the show goes on. But there was a lot of the same kind of chatter. I was watching a little bit of the post-game show on Spectrum, and hear a little bit of what Frank Vogel saying after the game, and some of the players, and they were kind of going back to we need more energy, more intensity, and this and that, whatever. But yeah, okay, you can always play harder, you can always play with more intensity, whatever. Milwaukee kicked their ass because they're better, and they were running circles around the Lakers offensively and defensively, and making it so the Lakers were so damn confused on what they were trying to do defensively that they were giving up open shots on the perimeter. They were giving open shots underneath. They were all of it. Milwaukee shot about 70% in the first half, and I don't think this was a care issue for the Lakers. I think they were thoroughly outclassed.
Yeah, they absolutely were. They gave up 78 points in the first half to Milwaukee. To put this in perspective, they scored 56 in the first half, which under normal circumstances would be all right. Good. Playing a pretty good game, and they weren't shooting well from behind the arc, but from the field overall, they actually 50%. Had a good percentage. Yeah, but they were still down 22 at the half. They turned the ball over 16 times in the game, gave up 25 points, and that was something going on from the first quarter onward. I believe they gave up 10 points in the first quarter off 7 turnovers. They were getting absolutely destroyed in the paint. They were giving up a lot of fast break opportunities because they were turning over the ball. And stop me if you've heard this before, they are not particularly good defending in transition. They were not very good, frankly, defending in a half-court set tonight either. They seemed allergic to the concept of even just watching the three-point line in this game. Sometimes they were getting, I think, confused by what Milwaukee was doing, as you alluded to, Brian. Sometimes I think they were just sort of out to lunch with some obvious things, like, you don't need 4 guys in the paint on a drive. You might want to pay attention to somebody like Pat.
It was just there was everyone's like, wait a minute, I thought you were going out there. I thought you were going out there. I thought you were going out there.
And this was also a game where I agree with you that I don't think the effort waned, but it did not take long for their collective confidence to seem like it was just like, God damn, man, these guys are so much better than us. We're going to go out and we're going to play hard because we're in front of our fans, and God knows they deserve our best effort this season, given what we've, offered them so far. But they looked like a team that knew they were playing an opponent just 3 or 4 levels above them.
And I think this is because LeBron, when he was asked, can you get to Milwaukee's level? That's sort of functionally like an extension of what we saw at the beginning of the game and what you're talking about. And I think it's such a great point that you made about confidence. As you get closer to the end of the season, the more they play games where all 3 of the big 3 are available, and continue, if it happens this way, to get stomped by the best teams in the league, the teams that ultimately matter the most. I think there is a concern that I have, certainly, that the confidence thing is going to become a problem. That they're going to know what the answer to the question is as they start to get in the playoffs. The belief aspect and all these other things, and the tricks that you have to do as an athlete to fool yourself into thinking you have a chance. I am worried that they are not going to go through those motions, and that if they don't improve relatively quickly going into and coming out of the break, the last 15 games of this season could be catastrophically ugly.
Yeah, it was funny after the game when LeBron and AD were doing their post-game press time together. AD threw out, and this is something he throws out a lot, but it's something athletes in general say, nobody's going to feel sorry for us. And I was actually thinking, given how bad it's gotten, I'm honestly not sure that's true. It would not shock me if there are some people actually feeling sorry for the Lakers, even though it's the Lakers, even though it's LeBron and, the Lakers exceptionalism, and people genuinely, this is not a cliche. Teams around the league really do get geared up and have a lot of fun when they beat the Lakers. They really do get every
That's true.
team's best shot. I mean, that is
I
not
wonder why teams are wasting their best shot on the Lakers right now.
Sure.
It's not needed.
Right, but but it is not a false narrative that teams that the Lakers, throw around and make excuses or whatever. But it wouldn't shock me if every now and then some players around the league were like, "God damn, man, kind of feel bad for him.
A little bad for
It's
this dude.
kind of hard to watch."
Yeah. Let's get to. I want to make sure we get to the trade, the new trade rumors. Mark Stein in his newsletter had a very interesting couple of nuggets about where the Lakers stand going into Thursday's deadline, and then a couple more things about the gap, shall we say, between the Lakers and the Milwaukee Bucks and other title contenders. Do all that next.
Laker fans, you've been hearing me tell you about Prize Picks for months. Have you signed up? Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You're going to love this app for NBA and mixed sport pick'em. Like, for a limited time, here's a no-brainer offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point, like 1 point. That's it. Like, bet on LeBron. You got this thing. But you must use the code NBA. That's right. It's an exclusive offer available for Locked On fans only who use the code NBA. Prize Picks has the best NBA DFS prop game on the market. Prize Picks offers more NBA props than any other DFS prop operator, offers all the superstar players as well as bench players, only recording a handful of minutes each game. And Prize Picks offers mixed sport entries. Like, you could take the over on LeBron points combined with hopefully the over on Matt Stafford completions, because like I'm sure a lot of you would like to see the Rams win, but you can do that in the same entry. Use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks, safe. They offer fast withdrawals. So go to prizepicks.com today. Use the promo code NBA. Go to the App Store. Download the app. If you're not playing Prize Picks, you honestly have no clue what you're missing.
So before we get to some of the trade rumors du jour, and it's been a really busy day, like some blockbuster team trades.
Zacto getting all weird out there.
I mean, right. Blockbuster trades among admittedly terrible teams.
Yeah.
But still blockbusters nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lakers still a central part of every rumor.
By the way, I have this prediction because, Sacramento made this huge deal with Indiana. They moved Tyrese Halliburton. They moved Buddy Hield. Everybody on this team has been linked to another team. I think when the dust settles, somehow the only king still on the roster is going to end up Marvin Bagley. Like the one guy who
desperately wanted out.
Oh, whose like father has basically been standing outside the Kings facility with a sign, "Free my son." Like, he's going to be the one guy still there somehow.
There's an irony to that. So it's the gap here is interesting. And one of the things that I keep harping on that I think is important to reinforce again on after Tuesday's game is that, Trevor Ariza started this game with Malik Monk. There was no Avery Bradley. Stanley Johnson was out of the starting lineup. It was the big three. And this time it was Ariza and Malik Monk. And, there were some questions about that. Why isn't it Stanley? Nobody was saying, why isn't it Avery Bradley? But, a lot of questions about why Frank Vogel can't settle on a starting lineup. And it was matchup based. They were thinking about who's going to guard Giannis in the second unit. They wanted Stanley Johnson available for that. And a bunch of different things. And it made sense when Vogel explained it. The part that I think people in their frustration who follow the team need to understand is that these decisions, while I'm not saying they're unimportant and they matter, these are not the choices and the circumstances that have the Lakers 3 games under 500. The difference between starting Trevor Ariza and starting Stanley Johnson in terms of lineup optimization, or even starting Avery Bradley versus Malik Monk, and Monk comes off the bench versus start all these other things. The differences in this stuff in terms of how it actually would impact their win-loss record is pretty minimal. And there is no fix in lineup optimization. Their fix is their guys need to either, play better than we can expect than we would expect them to in certain skill sets defensively and all that stuff. And Russell Westbrook needs to be much better. Like, that's kind of the fix. Their best players need to be better. It's not
and also
Trevor Ariza versus Stanley Johnson
sure.
that's holding this team back. I think it's an important distinction to make.
Sure. I mean, they need also guys available game to game, every single game. What are you doing?
There's a bug in here.
All right, stay focused. Stay on point.
It flew into my nose. My ample nose.
It's important. It's important.
A lot of real estate in there. One of the only places in LA where housing is available. Cheap.
I think it's important to
3
remember
bedroom.
too, like, some of the problems have been dictated in part because of guys in and out of the lineup, but also if this was something that Vogel was just farting around with and it was pretty obvious what he ought to be doing, you would hear guys start subtly or even not subtly making it clear they would like the coach to make up his damn mind. And that's not what's happening. So, and, guys like LeBron, Anthony Davis, they're not going to be afraid, Melo, they're not going to be afraid to put that out there if they really feel like the coach is just overthinking this and the obvious solution is standing there in front of them and they don't get it. That's not
particularly as you pointed out for Tuesday's show, for a guy who probably isn't going to be here next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
What, are you worried about hurting his feelings?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about this rumor. So tonight's, Tuesday night's game, I think really put into context some of the dilemma that the Lakers have. They are obviously not good enough. They obviously need an infusion of talent. That is self-evident, but how they get it, where they get it, what's available for them in the market as Taylor Horton Tucker's value goes down a little bit and the market starts to play out. This from Mark Stein. It should be clear by now the Lakers don't have the trade assets to acquire a definite difference maker or offload Russell Westbrook to Houston without surrendering their precious 2027 first round pick. The Lakers thus might be forced, in fact, to wait for the buyout market to manufacture a badly needed talent infusion. Yet they continue to be linked on the trade front as time runs out with the likes of Boston's Josh Richardson and Orlando's Terrence Ross. Andy, you had a brilliant tweet I thought during Tuesday's game where you noted that perhaps at the risk of being a prisoner of the moment, the Lakers are not one Terrence Ross away from contention.
Look, first of all, for other witticisms like that, make sure to follow us at Cam Brothers on Twitter. Unless you are convinced that THT's trade value is going to plummet, for the rest of this season and the rest of next season, and if he has a player option the following year, because he would naturally exercise it at that point, the idea that you would cash him in, beyond just the context of this is the guy that you chose and prioritized over Alex Caruso, who before breaking his wrist because the villainous Grayson Allen, who is basically bizarro Austin Reeves, undercut him and broke his wrist.
If Ted Cruz played basketball,
or the Zodiac.
Let's just say it's not Grayson Allen's fault that he looks like Ted Cruz, but it's fitting.
No, but here's the thing too. Grayson Allen ought to recognize. I mean, he's lived with his face his whole life. He ought to recognize what it looks like by now. He ought to recognize how that face plays, and he ought to recognize the need to make adjustments because of said face.
Yeah,
anyway,
I agree.
With all of that backstory with THT and all of the importance that they put on retaining him in terms of what he meant for the present and the future and the role that they had earmarked for him, and the belief that they ostensibly had in him, to trade him for, he had been linked to in Mark Stein's piece, Terrence Ross with the Orlando Magic. He's a volume scorer, and he's a fine scorer in the league, doesn't really do much else of anything. He's, I believe, 31 years old, and he's a fine player, but he has never made any team that
He's not a
been
fine
on.
player, Andy. He's fine. He's
Right.
a fine player.
Right. The idea that you would move a 21-year-old that you earmarked as this important to the organization for a 31-year-old guy when you are struggling to stay as a 9 seed, that's just absolutely insane. I mean, that would be just a team so desperate to not want to look like they made a mistake by missing the playoffs that they would throw good money after bad, when here's the thing, everybody by now thinks you made a mistake. Whether unless you win a championship somehow, whether you make the playoffs as an 8 seed, as a play-in, or you miss it altogether, everybody is going to think this decision where we are now was driven by mistakes. You don't compound that by making desperate moves to cover your ass. You just
okay.
don't.
So let's take a break.
Same with like Josh Richardson with the Celtics.
Josh Richardson, same thing. Perfectly fine player. I wouldn't object to having him on the team, but what it means to actually go out and acquire him. So with that in mind, I completely agree with you. I will ask you this question when we after the break. Do you think the Lakers will throw good money after bad? That's the question. We'll do it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar. Okay, this is the time of year where February, you've pretty much given up on all your New Year's resolutions. But this year, you can stick to the one about eating right thanks to Built Bar. And it doesn't even feel like a New Year's resolution because you're enjoying yourself in the process. Have you tried the new Puffs? If you have not, you are missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein infused marshmallow. They're fluffy. They're like a marshmallow. They're not a protein bar. They're a treat. And they are covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are fan favorites with incredible flavors like coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, cinnamony churro. These are all going to be your new favorites. And go to built.com, scroll down the macros chart. You're going to be blown away by what this is that you're putting in your body. Most Built bars contain just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. And that's the good stuff. Compare that to a candy bar, usually like 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar. Like, that is not what you want to be ingesting. Great flavors like coconut almond, mint brownie, and for this month, white chocolate, cookies, and cream. They are all awesome, great, unique flavor combinations. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your first order. Again, promo code LOCK15, 15% off at built.com.
So before we get to Russ, some provocative comments Andy made after the game by Russell Westbrook. I'll ask you that question. Do you think with the trade deadline now, basically, 24 hours away, noon on Thursday Pacific time, do you think the Lakers actually will make this sort of what I would consider to be a panic move, trading any of their, semi-valuable assets in THT, that first round pick,
any of their THTs,
whatever they got for
or the pick,
Terrence Ross / Josh Richardson caliber player. Do you think they'll do that?
I'd like to think they wouldn't. I mean, I would never put it past them, just because this season has been such a disaster, and I have concerns that they would worry so much about the noise of missing the playoffs that they would do an exceptionally short-sighted move like this. I'd like to think they wouldn't, and I guess if I had to bet right now, I'm betting they won't. Not confidently, but just it's so ridiculous. Like, it's so ridiculous. Why would you do this?
It's almost as ridiculous, Andy, as trading for Russell Westbrook. We'll see. We'll have a little more insight. I think if they calm people down by winning, if they win against Portland on Wednesday, that calms things down a little bit, I guess, maybe going into Thursday. But
I don't know. I mean, the flip side is if they lose against Portland, what are you preserving? What are you salvaging?
I don't know. And it ain't, as you said, it's not what's their problem is not anything that Terrence Ross is going to be able to fix. So we'll see. Let's move on to Russell Westbrook, who, was not in a bad mood after the game on Tuesday. He met the media. He was cordial, but made it very clear that he is not on the same page as the coaching staff. He was asked about the frequent lineup changes, not even him being in and out of it, just the frequent lineup changes. You never know when you're coming in, he said. You never know when you're coming out. You never know when you're playing. You never know a bunch of things. And I'm speaking for me personally. So it's a difficult process for me to be able to figure out and create some rhythm and some consistency where we can actually see what we're able to do as a team. But those decisions are made by him, meaning Frank Vogel, and his coaching staff. And you've got to live with them and move on. He talked about not being out on the floor late in the game again today, Tuesday night. This was I thought, a particularly pointed moment. The question, just because I don't want your words to get misinterpreted or twisted, I want to be clear about this. Has Frank been clear enough with you about when you're not going to play? No, he hasn't, but I don't need him to be clear. He makes whatever decision he makes, so that's up to him. My job as a professional is to come to work, be in a positive mindset, put my head down and do my work to the best of my ability, and be there to encourage my teammates. Do you have a sense of what benchmarks you have to hit to be in the closing lineup more consistently? Who? Me? I don't have an answer for you, brother. I wish I did. I shouldn't have to hit any benchmark, to be honest. I put a lot of work in. I've got a lot of respect in this game. I don't have to hit a benchmark or shouldn't have to. I earn the right to be in closing lineups. Anytime you get a guy, Andy, who punctuates a question to the media with brother, you are thinking and entering dark territory.
Brother.
Because I don't think Russell Westbrook looks at that member of the media as a genuine brother.
If memory serves, okay, he didn't go brother, but Trez last season did a lot of bro. Didn't he do a lot of like bro and bro?
I think so, yeah.
And Trez was often very unhappy with how last year's season went. So I think he may be onto something.
But this is definitely evidence that he's trying to put on a good face and whatever, but it is not going well inside that relationship.
No, and for what it's worth, in the closing moments of the game, Russ, who was not out there before basically the flag was waved, LeBron and AD were on the bench, and Russ went out of his way to, basically tell him, keep your head up, try to encourage him. And, that is something that you want to see from all three of these guys towards each other. And LeBron said after the game that, it's his job to keep AD and Russ's spirits up, Russ's job to keep his and AD's up, AD, LeBron and Russ's, and down the line. And they're all there to help each other. And, LeBron even said that they have clearly not done a good enough job helping Russ in all these circumstances. One of the things that I think is really interesting, to be totally honest, about the whole Russell Westbrook not closing games thing, it is obviously a thing in the sense that he's Russell Westbrook. He's a player of that stature. So anything involving him has significance, and you have certain concerns about the mood in the locker room. Although, as Frank Vogel said after the game, there's not a good energy with this team of late anyway. But if we're really being honest about this, beyond sort of the headline grabbing, gossipy nature of it, this team is not playing well enough that who closes really is that big of a thing. Like, I mean, I'm just saying in terms of like practical effect and like grand scheme of things, who's out there closing for a team that's struggling to stay 500 on some level? Who effing cares? You know what I mean? Like,
I get
like
what
there's
you're
an
saying.
element of like,
right.
And it should also be made clear. Russ is not complaining about this unprompted. He's being asked, which you can have all of your own opinions about Russ's opinion on whether or not he should be out there, and the idea that he's earned the right to be out there, sort of carte blanche. I don't know if I know I don't agree with that, but that element of it aside, in some respects, this is more of just like a talking point than a matter of circumstance, I think.
I get what you mean, and it's definitely worth pointing out that like it to me, it's just a symbol. Like what you're getting at here is like it's a symbol of just how bad this team is relative to expectations and relative to what they're supposed to be. That what we're talking about here is relatively inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. I do think that how Westbrook plays, because of what I was talking about earlier, it's just like this team is ultimately geared towards a bunch of imperfect players that you hope can kind of get the job done, and their three stars being so good. This is the template going into the season that they're just going to have so much goddamn talent that it's gonna figure itself out, and they'll just be too good not to win. And to some degree, I certainly bought into that. Guys being healthy and whatever. That I picked the Lakers to win the conference, so I didn't think it was going to be this bad. But when you see Westbrook sort of openly criticizing the coaching staff, which is what he was doing. I mean, like when he talks about the lineups and the inconsistency of the lineups, not even something like the closing lineups, the communication, whatever. That first question where he says, nobody knows when they're playing. You don't know when you're coming in. You don't know when you're coming out. You never know a bunch of things. That is a very pointed criticism of the coaching staff. And, and if this doesn't improve over the next 5 or 10 games when they have access to the big three and all this other stuff, the last 15 games of the season could be really ugly. And the problem here is, and this was the other part of the trade rumor stuff that came out today, one of the reasons the Lakers may not be able to trade their first round pick is they can't trade 2027 and something later. They can only trade 2027 right now if they want to make a deal. If they wait until after July 1st, they can also trade 2029 or both. And I believe it was Stein who pointed out that they might need both of those first round picks to get off the Westbrook contract this summer. Again, these are very dark places. Like they have another season of this. And so, yes, I don't think Frank Vogel is going to be the coach next year. So maybe a different coach handles it differently, but there's also no reason to believe that Russell Westbrook's going to be a better player next year than he is this year. A year older. And so, if it is dissolving to this point now, it is a very distressing place for the Lakers to be because there's no easy way to be different next year. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say about that for tonight, at least.
It's just they're in a bad place, and they very clearly don't know how to get themselves out of it. And
they're in a bad place now, as Vogel acknowledged, and they're in a bad place going forward.
Yeah, and as I've acknowledged, that they are all hyper aware and have been for a while of how much the lack of continuity and just the general chaos has put them in a place. LeBron talked about that. Most teams struggle if they don't have their best players. Even great teams, they largely struggle if they go a long extended period without their best players. What is really concerning is the last few games they've had their best players, and it's not really looking much better. So we'll see.
All right, so we'll see what happens Wednesday night against Portland. That is a must-win game. Again, more important than the Milwaukee game, not for the ego, but for the actual stuff that's happening in the standings. They were supposed to lose to Milwaukee, but they need to beat Portland. Who knows even who is going to be playing for Portland, given how active they've been in the trade market. I'm not sure who's eligible to pass physicals and all that. So we'll see. Got to win Wednesday night.
Will get canceled.
Great. I think the Lakers would take a forfeit. Sold. All right. Locked On Lakers, thank you for making your first listen of every day. Subscribe to Locked On Lakers on YouTube. We'll see everybody on Thursday.